Hello and welcome. It is 8:30. It is the 20th day of March 2021, and I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the old in old school, and the S in sarcasm, and the R in redundant, the OGGM, and it's March, which means it's Mega Dungeon March, which means we're talking about the building and populating of a mega dungeon. And you may notice something different on your screen. I have a book in my face. Why is that? Because today we are talking about the DM's single greatest tool when designing a mega dungeon: random tables. Oh yes, other DMs will talk about agency and theme and history and player input, but really, and don't tell this to anybody, don't share it, it's a DM secret from me to you, your single greatest tool in the design of a mega dungeon is random tables. First, we need to know who built the mega dungeon. Second, we need to know why they built the mega dungeon. Third, we need to know where they built the mega dungeon. 4, we need to know how the mega dungeon went from what it originally was intended to be to what it is now. 5th, of course, we need to know what exactly is in our mega dungeon from a wide, what are our zones? What are our, iconic encounters, like, the Hall of Glowing Skulls or whatever, what are our factions? But now we're getting down to the nitty gritty. And that's random tables, random dungeon dressing, random pit contents, random monsters, random chest contents, even random room designs, random treasure, whatever. Because once you make your initial mega dungeon map, and this one is awesome, if a little ridiculously large, but still awesome, you're going to have a lot of space. And you might have 3 or 4 ideas of iconic encounters, like the Room of Glowing Skulls or the 35 bugbears in a 15 by 15 room. But then you're going to have a lot of empty space. And unlike with a normal dungeon, when everybody comes in, they do whatever they're going to do, they leave, and chances are, 9 out of 10 times, the tomb of the Sandwich Lord will never, ever be visited again by your adventurers. It will be completely forgotten, unless it's like some story they tell 6 years from now. Remember that time we were in the tomb of the Sandwich Lord and you tried to lick the wall, Susan? Yeah. But, that's real estate that's never going to be seen again because reasons. But a mega dungeon, the whole point of a mega dungeon is your players are going to go in, leave, and hopefully return. And you can just recycle that mega dungeon over and over and over again. You can even run an entire mega dungeon campaign if you find a group of players who are willing to do that. Which means your players are going to go in, do stuff, leave, and come back. But they've done stuff in the mega dungeon. And unlike a normal dungeon, which is a static environment, a mega dungeon is constantly in flux. It's constantly changing. It's part of the allure of the mega dungeon is when you go back in, you kind of don't know what to expect. I mean, you went in room 15, you saw the weird statue, you killed the 12 gargoyle things, you come back, but then you have to go through room 15 again, but time has passed, and much like in real life, that's empty real estate that something might have moved in to replace. Sort of like hermit crabs. Here, a hermit crab sees a new shell because that monster, that crab got killed. The hermit crab's going to leave its old shell and move into its new shell, which means same thing, dungeon room. You got wandering monsters wandering around in this ecology because the mega dungeon is a living, breathing ecology. There are things, just like in a jungle or a forest or whatever, there's these things that just kind of wander around, and now here's available space. A bear moves into an available cave, a monster or whatever is going to move into this new room, depending upon how much time has passed. Even in a day, from them leaving room 15 and coming back to room 15, that's still plenty of time for something to go, hey, room 15's open, I can move in. Which is why you need random tables. You need to decide what are the general, you break up the mega dungeon into areas. So where's our map again? Okay, so here we have a thing. And then, you could say, like, this half is area A, and this half is area B. We're using Borrow Maze by Greg Gillespie because it's a great mega dungeon. Let's say this is all themed to, I don't know, vampires. So, and then everything around here is themed to, I don't know, crazy gnomes, because whatever. So anything you run into in this section is going to be vampire or vampire adjacent, and anything you run into this section is pretty much going to be crazy gnomes. Now maybe the vampires and the gnomes get along and have some kind of symbiotic relationship, or maybe they are constantly at war with each other because the crazy gnomes are tired of the vampires eating their babies. That's all politics you need to think about when we're talking about the factions that make up your mega dungeon. But the wandering monsters of who's going to be wandering around in this area, generally the vampire and vampire adjacent things are going to stick to their area, and the crazy gnomes and the crazy gnome adjacent things are going to stick to their area. So you have one random table for this section, and we'll call it, random monster table 1A, and you have one random table for this section. We'll call it random table 1B. So a bunch of players come in and they clear out, like, say, this room, and this room of the vampire and vampire adjacent. So maybe they directly come back to these rooms, or maybe they don't, which, you should probably do all your rooms in your dungeon in pencil, because you're going to be erasing things and then replacing them. All right, so we have 3 cleared out rooms. Our players leave. We figure out now is where we figure out our wandering monster math, because this is what's most important for filling out the mega dungeon and constantly changing the ecology. What are the chances that something's going to come wandering by? Normally it's like, you check every hour, you check every round, depending upon the population. Let's assume, vampires tend to be pretty stationary, and vampire adjacent things tend to be pretty, vampires are sort of, unless they're hungry, kind of just sort of slow and just sort of into their whatever, and generally lazy if it doesn't involve feeding. So we'll say once every hour you check for a random monster. It's like, okay, unless there's noise. Always, if there's noise, then you should track wandering monsters. Oh, something stuck in my mouth, sorry. But whatever. Player characters have left. Life is returned. Life goes on. The circle of life, whatever. And, it's like spiderweb or string or something. I'm sorry. So let's roll. How many hours have passed before anything comes back in again? Maybe the players are going to come back and clear out the rest of these rooms. Maybe they're going to go someplace else, whatever. So you just randomly figure out, 5 hours. And roll, blah, 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 blah. All right, so we figured out there's 2 chances that wandering monsters are going to come by and see that these 3 rooms are empty. So then we go to our randoming monster table that we've designed for that area. And since it's vampire and vampire adjacent, we look at our table, and let's say there's 20 things on our wonder monster table. All right. So, and then we just write down, vampire, vampire spawns, master vampire, vampire familiars, the Igors and the Renfields, things that might, be adjacent to vampires, things that might live off the vampire, things like maybe, what do the vampires do with the bodies? Well, there's probably some slimes or some whatever. The vampires probably have undead servants because, maybe some zombies or maybe some ghouls or maybe a skeleton major domo. Vampires like their places relatively clean, so you might have some slimes and some servants and maybe some people who are, trying to break into the vampires thing. So you might have some grave robbers or maybe another adventuring party, and maybe just some, and then for giggles and like the last 3, you just roll in some, standard mega dungeon bizarreness. Maybe rival undead, maybe the gnomes from the area below, maybe a fire elemental shows up because it escaped from some vampire experiment, maybe some whatever. But you get a general idea that your random monster table kind of fits the theme of the area, vampire and vampire adjacent, but then you throw in a few left fields in there just because it's a mega dungeon, and sometimes you get, Nazi clowns riding dinosaurs in mega dungeons, and skeletons in combat wheelchairs, because Mega Dungeon. So you roll, blah, blah, blah. And then, you say, okay, during the time that the player characters have been gone, one of those 3 rooms has been repopulated by a group of ghouls, because whatever. What are those, and then you kind of just keep with the randomness, okay, what do those ghouls have with them? We roll on the random table, and they've got some gold with them, and then we just, determine, like, what's the ghouls' motivation. And it could be the ghouls are trying to break free of the thraldom of the vampires and just have their own little life of eating dead bodies and not really want to be bothered by anybody anymore. So when the players come back, here's a group of ghouls. And they're like, wait, this what? I wasn't expecting this. But the ghouls are maybe like, hey, don't kill us, okay? Look, we don't want to work for the vampires anymore. We just want our own little thing. All we want to do is eat some dead bodies. We don't care about the living. We don't care about the undead. If you kill the vampires, we'll eat them. If there's dead bodies and you're not planning on bringing your friends back, we'll eat them. But that's all we want. We're just ghouls, man. We don't want any more of this combat. Then maybe you could work with the ghouls together against the vampires, or maybe the ghouls might become even more powerful enemies because you've attacked them, but one of them survives, and ghouls have a tendency to repopulate really quickly, much like, all the undead that can make spawns and whatever. So now you've got a new story and blah. And then things happen. More rooms get cleared out. You repopulate them. Maybe a party of the gnomes has come in. Maybe a new monster has moved in from another area and is trying to claim out a kingdom. Maybe a group of zealot priests have come in and want to eradicate the vampires once and for all, but they're extremely fanatical humanists. So even though they're lawful good, if there's any non-humans in your party, they consider you as evil as the vampires because, fanatic craziness. Whatever. That's the whole fun of the Undermountain. You don't have to populate every single solitary room. You just sort of come up with the general theme. You populate 3 or 4 rooms. You have your iconic whatever, 1 or 2 iconic somethings per section, like the Hall of Floating Skulls. And the rest is just empty space that you can just randomly generate ahead of time, after they've gone through. If they've killed things and there's now empty space, a new thing can move in. It's that constant flux is what makes Mega Dungeons so much fun. So before you go any further, consider the general theme of each section of the Mega Dungeon, depending upon how big your Mega Dungeon is, like Undermountain has got 10 levels divided into 4 or 5 zones each, but each of the levels also sort of have a major theme. Whatever, you don't know. I don't know what your Mega Dungeon is going to be like, but if I'm using, our UCLA example, then our zones would be educational, athletic, services, stuff like that. If I'm using Burrow Maze as our example, then we just on different types of undead and different types of undead adjacent. Or like we just said, we've got a group of vampires up here, and we've got a group of crazy gnomes at here. Maybe they're at war with each other. Anything that wanders into this area is going to be vampire and vampire adjacent, and then you just go from there. Wash, rinse, repeat. That is the general ecology, the first step of your Mega Dungeon. I hope you appreciate this content for Mega Dungeon March. If you do, let me know. If you don't and you're planning on leaving, unsubscribing, why are you unsubscribing? Let me know, because I cannot fix it if you don't tell me what's broken. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. Really, it's 2 seconds of your life to hit that little blue button. Help me hit 500 subs by August 4th, and we'll do something crazy. And until then, I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming. Now get off my lawn.